In the first part of this lesson, we discussed graphing an inequality. In order to graph an inequality, we had to understand how to read that inequality, the variables, the symbols, and the number. And we had to understand how to create and draw a number line. And then we had to know what goes into actually graphing that inequality line. In the second part of this lesson, we'll look at the same thing, but in reverse. We're going to look at a graph of an inequality and figure out how to write that inequality. We'll use the same skills and knowledge, but do everything backwards. The inequalities we're working with are graphed on a number line, and the number line is telling us what's included in that inequality, like this one here. So what we want to figure out in this lesson is how do we take this visual representation of the inequality and convert it into an algebraic representation using a variable. To do that, we need to know a few things. We need to know, what does this circle mean? What does this arrow indicate? How do we read this number line? And how do we actually write the inequality? So let's break that down. Let's start with the number line. Here we can see our number line, zeros over here, negatives off to the left, positives off to the right. And so we see that everything off to the left is less than our number. Okay? Here's 0, -1, -2. Okay? So that's everything off to the left is less than that number of 0. Okay? So that's how we understand the number line. Now this arrow, or let's go back to the circle. Okay? The circle is on 0. And so that's the number in our inequality. Okay? It's on 0. But if you notice, it's a filled in or closed circle. Okay? And what that means is that we're including 0 in our inequality. So when we go to write our inequality, we're going to be as much as we're going to be less than or greater than, we're also going to be equal to 0. Because I see this closed filled in circle. If it had been an open circle, it wouldn't be equal to it. Now let's determine, are we less than or greater than? Well, we determine that from the arrow here. The arrow, which starts on 0 with our closed circle, is going off to the left, okay, to everything to the left of 0, which is everything less than 0. Okay? So this arrow is telling us that our inequality is including all of the numbers that are less than 0. Let me say that again. This graph is showing all of the numbers that are less than 0. So now what is our inequality going to look like? X is less than or equal to 0. Remember, the X is representing, our variable is representing all of the numbers that fit into this inequality, which is everything that's less than or to the left of 0. I use the less than or equal to symbol because I'm talking about all of the numbers that are less than 0, but I say it's also equal to 0 because I saw this closed filled in dot. Okay? And I know that I'm referring to 0 because that's where I'm looking at on my number line. So what this is saying, both of these, visually and algebraically, is that we're talking about numbers, x, which represents all of those different numbers, that are less than or equal to 0. Okay? And that's how I would take the graph inequality and convert it into the algebraic inequality. Let's look at some examples. So this is the same page we're working on in the last lesson, just the bottom half of it. So here we're focused on writing inequalities for each of these graphs. Let's look at graph number 1. So remember, we're looking for what the circle is. Okay, so what's going on here, where that initial circle is, if it's filled in or if it's open, and then where our arrow is going. Okay. Now, as we're writing this inequality, we're talking about, remember, inequality is talking about that there's some group of numbers or some series of numbers that are included in this, and we use x to represent all of those numbers. Remember, that's what a variable does. It represents unknown numbers or a whole bunch of different numbers. And so we know we're going to have an x, a variable. Now we need to figure out what our symbol is. Okay? What's our symbol? Is it less than, greater than, less than or equal to, greater than or equal to? And to do that, we look at our graph here. Okay? Look at our graph here. So the first thing I notice is that it's a closed circle. Okay? It's a closed circle, and so I know that's going to be equal to, less than or equal to, or greater than or equal to. And I see here that my arrow is going off to the left. Okay? So it's starting at 1, and the arrow is going down to 0, -1, -2, -3. All of those numbers are less than this initial number 1. Okay? So we know we're starting at 1. Let's go there. So we'll put 1 on the other side. And in the middle, we need our symbol. Okay? And so we know that the arrow is going towards all the numbers that are less than 1. And so I can say x is less than 1. But then because I have this closed circle, it's also equal to 1. So I'll put the less than or equal to symbol. So this inequality, based off of this graph, is x is less than or equal to 1. Let's look at another example, graph 2. Again, we know we're going to have some unknown, or a whole bunch of numbers represented by x. And we could look at where we're starting. Okay, where is our initial circle? Okay, it's right here at -5. And so I know -5 is going to be on the other side. But I need to figure out what symbol goes in the middle. Okay. Well, I can see my arrow. You can see my arrow is going off to the right of -5. And it's going off to the right of -5. So it's saying that all of the numbers greater than -5. Okay. So that's x is greater than -5. And then I need to determine, do I need greater than or equal to? Well, this is an open circle, so it's not equal to -5. So I would just write it like this. X is greater than -5. Okay. This graph goes with this inequality. Graph 3. Again, we're going to have an x that represents all of those numbers. It's starting at 3 over here. It's starting at 3. And we need to figure out, are we greater than or less than? Well, the arrow is going to the left, or to all the numbers that are less than 3. So if it's all the numbers that are less than 3, this would be x less than 3. Okay, because that's what that x is, all the numbers that are less than 3, and that's what we see on this graph. And because it's an open circle, I just leave it as less than. I don't do less than or equal to. Last one, graph 4. Again, I'll have an x. I see that it's starting at 4. Okay, starting at 4. And determine if it's less than or equal to. And I see here that it's starting at 4, and then it's going to the right of 4, okay, to the numbers that are bigger than 4 on the number line. And so we'd say this graph is showing all of the numbers, x, that are greater than 4, but I also notice that it's a closed circle, so it's all the numbers greater than or equal to 4. So that's how I would write that inequality, x is greater than or equal to 4. So I looked at, for each of these, I look at where is it starting, okay, what number is it starting at, what direction is it going, and then is it an open or closed circle. And that tells me how to write my inequality.